Good morning, good afternoon, and evening, wherever all of you are. And thank you so much for attending our first, well, this is not our first, but our first of several speakers this week who will be presenting to celebrate or continue to celebrate our Black History Month speaker series. Now, before I introduce you to our guest, let me quickly introduce myself to all of you. My name is Dr. Asia Ghazi. I am one of the graduate assistants here at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University and our Center for Global Partnerships and Learning. The center provides GCEP students with a myriad of services ranging from publication support, certificate programs, access to GCEP's academic journal, and a few other services. It is through the center that we bring you our programming to celebrate this Black History Month that's scheduled. With that said, I'm going to introduce our speaker, and I'm so honored to introduce our speaker, Asia Bribiesca-Hedin. Now, Asia is a proud alumna of the Pepperdine University Graziadio Business School, and I didn't know that you were part of Pepperdine, so that is amazing. Go Waves. And she's also the CEO of Bridgewell Professional Services, a leadership development and strategy execution firm in Southern California. Now, Asia began her career in management consulting and strategy execution with Ernst & Young after earning her MBA at USC. Today, she brings her strategic lens to leadership development and executive coaching, where she helps accomplished professionals become influential, sought-after leaders without overworking, people-pleasing, or selling their souls. Please welcome Asia Bribiesca-Hedin.
Hello. Thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Asia. And as I said, some of you probably heard as you were joining the call, it's not often that we get to be in a meeting with another Asia, especially with a unique name like that. So it's always a lot of fun when we get together. Thank you so much for having me. I love doing anything and everything with Pepperdine as my alma mater. I still credit Pepperdine with so much of the success and so many of the incredible opportunities, the type of work and impact I've been able to make, all of it you can trace back to my time at Pepperdine. So just always and forever grateful for that affiliation and for just so much that I got from the program. So again, welcome to all of you. I'm so excited to be here to talk about leading with confidence when you're the first or only. And I think it just seems like such a particularly perfect time to be having this discussion, right, during Black History Month. Because when you think back to, certainly my ancestors and, for perspective, I am Afro-Cuban. So I was born in Cuba, have been in the States since I was 2. But for all of us who have that Afro somewhere, in our background, just this month can be very meaningful. Because when you consider the struggles that our ancestors needed to go through to be here, to make this conversation that we're in today, and my ability to thank Pepperdine or, for what they've contributed to me, in order to make that a possibility, there was so much, right? You guys agree? There was so much that they needed to be able to manage and to manage confidently. And I think where that gets tricky is that often where confidence comes from, and we'll talk about this, I do have slides for you, but now I'm just kind of engaging in this conversation, so I hope that's okay with you guys. But often where confidence comes from is from our past, right? It comes from this history, this knowing, this experience we've already had that I've done this before, I can do it again. Or I know what that next step is, and as a result, I have some confidence that I have what it takes to undertake it. Now, when you're the first or the only, whether you're the first in your family to get a higher education, whether you are the first in your community to get a doctor in front of your name, right? Whether you are the first in your community to undertake any sort of endeavor or raise your hand for something where everyone who's already in that room looks different, there is no past evidence to rely on. There is none of that. Just like there wasn't, again, for those ancestors that I talked about who, you know, through their hardships and their willingness to be the first or only, were able to just create a different world, a different possibility, a different potential because of their willingness to be that and to be in that space and to be with that discomfort, right? Because, and again, I would love to, I don't know if you guys are able to interact in the chat, but I would love to hear from you guys. I want to see you either raise your hand or give me a yes. Have you at some point been the first or only in any environment? Might have been the only woman, the only man, the only young person, the only adult, whatever the case is. I want you to give me a yes in the chat or give me a thumbs up, just so I know you all are there. Thank you. Yes, I see some of the yeses. Yes. And that's the thing, right? It's nearly a universal experience. Rarely are we going to run into someone who has felt at home, at ease, and not out of their element, right? So it just is not going to happen. In particular, if we're up to big things. And you know when we need to be able to lead with confidence, even if we're the first or only, when we're up to big things. So that's why I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation. I'll go ahead and start the slides, but just so you know, I do keep my eyes on the chat. So please feel free to ask questions. I'll try to leave some time at the end as well for any questions that pop up. But I want you guys to be a part of this conversation because it really is that. It's a conversation. I don't think there's anybody probably alive today who has not experienced feeling out of their element and feeling like as a result, maybe they couldn't show up fully, they couldn't contribute fully, and they couldn't really live into their potential. And so I'm here to have this conversation because that's simply, by the end of this conversation, a decision that I hope you see you do not need to make. Just like our ancestors didn't make it, you know, they chose that in spite of the discomfort, they were going to lean into it. That's where I want us to go, but to go there maybe with a few more tools than they had when they undertook the challenges, which of course are probably much larger than any of us might need to undertake, given the wonderful privilege we have of being in this conversation right now. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And if you guys can just give me a super quick thumbs up to let me know that you can see my screen, I would appreciate it. Awesome. Okay. So I love to channel Oprah. So this I got from her. What I know for sure. These are the three things I know for sure. To be effective at leading yourself and others, especially when you're the first or only, you need to have real self-confidence. We're going to talk about what that is and why it's important to distinguish what it is. Anyone can learn how to grow their self-confidence, right? There's literally no exception here. And when you do it right, having real self-confidence is actually easier and offers just more success, more peace of mind, more opportunity than trying to pretend to be confident. And so we're going to get into all of that. But these are the learning points that we're going to dive into. You know, I want you to distinguish confidence versus self-confidence. There is a difference and you'll understand why it's important. And I already alluded to some of that earlier on. I want you to understand the impact of low self-confidence on decision-making, and then as a result, on your leadership effectiveness. Question for you guys. So again, go ahead and put your hands on the keyboard and let me know just in a couple of words. It looks like a lot of you, just about all of us probably, have experienced being the first or only. When have you been the first or only? Just give me one instance where you've been the first or only. You can, anything that you're comfortable sharing.
Oh, hi, this is Dalshala Alford. I've been the only Black student in the classroom, been the only Black female worker in the office.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And I see also in the chat, Yamile, college classrooms and a professional experience, first woman with a career. Yeah. Is you gonna, growing up, I grew up here in Southern California, but the town I was in, there certainly they just weren't other, Black kids. So I was often the only Black child in any of my classrooms. And again, this isn't limited to, being obviously the first woman or the first of a race. You may be the first who's differently abled. You may be the first, again, in your age category. You may be the first from your income level. Everyone else might be middle class or upper class, and you might be joining at a different level. In fact, I grew up, having been an immigrant and being raised by a single mother, it was just a very modest upbringing. So I was often the poorest kid in the class, and that was another way that I was the first or only male in your department. Yep. Yeah. And again, it's one way or another, that discomfort, that feeling of being out of your element, I think it's ubiquitous. It is a shared human experience, I suspect. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So now I have a question for you. How do you rate your self-confidence? And you don't have to put it in the chat, but I want you to come up with a number, whether it's a 1 through 10, I want you to go ahead and reach for that number. Okay, you guys have that number. And now I want to know how you came up with that number. So how did you come up with that number? For most people, right, they'll come up with that number as a result of some evidence, again, past experience. I've done it before, I can do it again, or I've done similar work. I know this environment inside out. I know this domain or this expertise inside out. It's based on evidence. And it's also, as a result, based on a circumstance, on whether the circumstance is familiar, whether you've had exposure to it in the past, whether there's some certain level of comfort. And so I refer to that as circumstantial confidence. Most people call it confidence, and I like to distinguish it this way because it's circumstantial confidence. Now, here's the thing. Of course, we want circumstantial confidence because circumstantial confidence comes from experience. It comes from having been there and done that. And of course we want that. Again, we want that expertise, that background to bring with us. But when we're in times of change, when there's turmoil, when a pandemic hits, right? When there are constant reorganizations, during those times, what we don't have is evidence-based confidence. You guys with me? That is exactly what we're missing, and that's exactly when we need it most. Oh, let's see, there we go. So this is where we get into distinguishing self-confidence. So self-confidence is unique and different from circumstantial confidence because it's not dependent on that history, that experience, that expertise, that comfort, none of that. You can be dropped into a situation where you are completely ill at ease and still have self-confidence. And why is that? Because self-confidence is based on your willingness to have your own back and your commitment to not being a jerk to yourself if you mess it up. You guys with me? That's what creates self-confidence. That's what will keep you moving forward and not allow you to be stopped by self-doubt, not allow you to be stopped by someone else's pettiness, but not allow you to be stopped by whether or not the environment is as welcoming or belonging or filled or inclusive as it should be. Because I want you to think about it for a second. When I alluded earlier to our ancestors and some of the hardships they must have had to endure. Now, fast forward, and here we are today. Is what you want driving your potential to be determined by someone else behaving appropriately or acting in a certain way or not being petty or doing all the right things? It would be fantastic if all of those things were in place. But the reality is that we don't want to leave our potential, we don't want to leave our purpose, and we don't want to leave our future and the impact and contribution that we can make in the hands of somebody who's, frankly, there's a good chance they really don't care about any of those things. And yet we inadvertently put ourselves in a position to relinquish our willingness to go after that contribution, that purpose, that potential, to whether we think someone else is going to agree, whether they're going to be welcoming, whether they're going to like us, whether they're going to smile, whether the technology is going to work, whether the pandemic's going to go away, whether traffic is going to be on my side. Do you guys get me? All of those things can theoretically inform how you show up and the decisions that you make, and as a result, how you lead and the results you create, not only for yourself, but for your teams. But here's the thing, is that what you want to have driving your decisions? It's okay if you want to decide that this is just too difficult and, because somebody rolled their eyes at you, you're going to give up on your potential, your possibility, your future, the legacy you wanted to leave for your family. You guys with me? You can make that decision, but don't pretend that it's not a decision. It is a decision. Because the alternative is to let someone else's pettiness drive that future. So you get to choose, right? It's entirely up to you to choose how you respond to things not looking or going the way that you want them to. So I actually want to stop here for a moment. I want to hear from you guys if you have any questions or any comments that you want to share about what I've covered so far. And Asia, I see that you also mentioned, yes, this definitely lives in the realm of imposter syndrome. But even for folks who feel that, no, I don't struggle with imposter syndrome at all, picking them up and dropping them into an unknown will have, again, all of that magnificent confidence, and capability that they show up with 90% of the time just kind of fall to the wayside. And that's where I want you to see it's not dependent on evidence. It's not dependent on comfort. It's actually, your comfort is frankly irrelevant as to whether you have your own back and are willing to not be really an a-hole to yourself if you get it wrong, if you screw it up, if you look stupid, right? So let's see. Usman, you said, that's awesome. Self-compassion, mindfulness, and meditation are also really helpful, useful for overcoming imposter syndrome. Yes. Yes, and I think there are a couple of great TED Talks on imposter syndrome, and you have the pro on imposter syndrome sitting right here in front of you, Dr. Asia. So definitely take advantage of her as a resource as well. But feel free to drop your questions in the chat if they come up. But I want you to really kind of hang on to that part of the conversation and consider what you've been allowing to drive and inform how you show up and the way you lead. Now, okay, here we go. Okay, so I talked a moment about what you're going to allow to drive your decisions. And so this is the decision driver journey. It is a model that I created because it was a very simple way to articulate why people do what they do, right? In a very, very simplistic format. I also call it the career CEO model. So I'll walk you guys through this because it helps me understand others' behavior and our decisions and why we make our decisions that actually are not even in our best interest, right? One would think that you make decisions, they may be, let's say, misinformed or short-sighted or however you want to think of it. But typically we like to think that we make decisions for our best interest. But frankly, when left to our own devices and going to the default of, if you want to think about the motivation triangle, right? Kind of seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, and doing both with the least effort possible. that doesn't always result in an outcome that's a decision in your best interest. And so I'm going to dive into this and talk about it across 3 dimensions: the experience to you as the leader. And actually, I'm going to pause there for a moment. I typically like to start conversations by distinguishing what I mean when I say the word leader, because I hope that all of you will choose to adopt this way of distinguishing leadership. I know that there are ways of identifying leadership or distinguishing it that have to do with title or your span of control, or maybe your budget, or the fact that you were appointed or anointed or voted in, whatever the case is. So I want you to set all of that aside for a second, and I want you to consider that who a leader is someone who elicits the best from themselves and others towards a common goal, period. Okay? Someone who elicits the best from themselves and others toward a common goal. That is all, right? That encompasses all of what we expect from a leader, and everything else falls under that. And the reason it's so important for you to understand that is because often I will come into a conversation, and I do sometimes start by asking who here is a leader. Maybe half the people in the room will raise their hands. And when I ask the other half why they didn't raise their hands, they'll give me some reason about, well, because I'm new, I'm still a student, you know, I'm nobody's boss, or I'm entry level, something to that effect. I don't have the title. And so I want you to get really, really clear and present to that leadership is not the same as supervisory responsibility. They are, you know, really divorced from one another. Ideally, of course, the person with the supervisory responsibility is also a leader and is operating, supervising, and managing from that place of, you know, I'm gonna pull the best that I can from myself, and from here, I'm going to inspire others to do the same to move us towards this objective, right? Or this goal. So one would hope that that's the case. But we know, simply because, you know, some polls would say 2/3 of all employed people would rather have a new boss than a raise. That tells us that not everyone with supervisory responsibility is showing up as a leader. You guys with me? Give me a hand raise or a thumbs up if you get that. Not everyone who has supervisory responsibility is showing up as a leader. Okay, so going back to the decision driver journey. At the very bottom, and I said I was going to talk about 3 dimensions. Sorry, I launched into my tirade about distinguishing leadership. So thank you guys, and I hope that was helpful for you as well. If you're struggling with seeing yourself as a leader because you don't have a title or recognition or whatever the case is, because now we can set all of that aside. So again, the 3 dimensions are the experience to you as the leader, what is driving your decisions, and then the focus. And when I say focus, I mean where most of your mental energy is going. At the very bottom, we have what we refer to as the concerned citizen. So the concerned citizen, typically we get here when we've had any number of setbacks, when we've started to internalize some of the negativity or criticisms that we're receiving from outside, when we feel that we're not receiving the level of validation or acknowledgement that we think we should be having. And, you know, it's obviously, as you can imagine, a very difficult place to be. Most of us have been here. We've been working for more than a few years at a time. And hopefully it's temporary. The experience here is one of fear and anxiety and hiding and playing small, because our decision driver on the other side of the model there is to simply avoid losing any more than we already have, right? It is literally self-preservation and loss avoidance. So from self-preservation and loss avoidance, there are only certain decisions that you're going to be able to access. There are only certain outcomes that you're going to be able to create from making decisions, you know, in that space. And I call it here concerned citizen. The concerned citizen is entirely focused, and all of their mental energy is going to themselves and keeping themselves safe. But here's the thing, I want you to think back to when you have felt unsafe. Now, when you have felt insecure. and then made decisions from that place of insecurity, of fear, of feeling at risk, of being unsafe. Can you think of any circumstance where the decision you made from that place actually left you feeling more secure? On the contrary, typically the decisions we make out of fear have a way of kind of stirring that fear up, or maybe winding it even tighter, if we want to think of it that way, and have us feel like we need to continue to shelter ourselves even more and make ourselves an even smaller target than we already were. Right? So making decisions out of fear doesn't actually move us towards safety. On the contrary, it makes us often feel more at risk. It's counterintuitive, but again, it's one of the magnificent things that the human brain does, left to its own devices. The next level up is the self-conscious careerist, I like to call it. And the focus here is on image and ego. See, the self-conscious careerist, all they want more than anything, and a lot of us are here, this is probably the closest we have to a default. What we want here is acknowledgement. We want validation. We want to look good. We want to save face. We don't want to be embarrassed, all of those things. So we spend a lot of time being reactive and in our heads and trying to guess what everyone is thinking or doing or feeling about us. And I don't know about you, but the last time that I tried guessing what was happening in anybody's head, it didn't work. And that usually does not work, but it doesn't stop us from doing it, you guys, right? It does not stop us from going to that place. But that self-conscious careerist, the experience can be just really, really filled with angst, because so much time is spent wondering what's happening in somebody else's head. Like, why didn't they invite me to lunch? What did that raised eyebrow mean? Why didn't she smile at me? And if we, based on what we know about just human beings, most of what other people are doing has nothing to do with us. But that doesn't stop us, right, from pulling it to us and making it about us. So just something to be aware with the self-conscious careerist, image, ego, and again, even acceptance, acknowledgement are really the focus there and the drivers. More than anything, the self-conscious careerist does not want to be embarrassed, humiliated. They don't want to fail. They don't want to be called out. And unfortunately, sometimes here, they also aren't even willing to be open to help or to learning, right? When they get wound up in this space. Now, I know that the way that I'm presenting it, it sounds like it's all bad and it's a space to stay away from, and I set it up this way because of the conversation that we're having, and I want you to understand the distinctions. But in reality, this is also where we go when we want to be better, right? When we want to actually aspire to more, when we want to be better, today than we were yesterday. So it's not all bad. Where it becomes a slippery slope is there are a couple of things. One is when it is dependent on other people giving you validation that you did well, or other people, giving you the thumbs up and agreeing you're good. That is when we really get into trouble in that area. And we fall into a sort of a validation trap. And the reason that it's a slippery slope is because if we go long enough without, as I mentioned earlier, if you go long enough without getting the validation and the acknowledgement that you're looking for, that is when you can end up at that concerned citizen space. And when we're there, we've really lost sight of our capabilities, our contribution, our intention, our ability to, elevate others. We kind of separate from all of that when it becomes about validation, because you know what? A lot of those things that we do to elevate ourselves and others are actually not going to be acknowledged. They're not going to be validated. Those things like not reacting to a slight from someone else, right? I'm gonna go back to How many of you have seen Self-Made? I don't know how popular that movie was, or that short series was. It was the series that just came out, I think it was last year, about Madam C.J. Walker. Anybody watch that? If you have not, please do. I highly recommend it, but it is absolutely fabulous. And the reason I bring her up is because she is credited with being, isn't it excellent? Yes, thank you, Dana. Yeah, absolutely excellent. But I bring her up because she is just incredible, right? By all accounts, what she was able to do was impossible. She was in an environment where there was a no from everyone, even the people in her community, other Black women, Black men, of course, the white community, the white men who held the purse strings and owned the dollars for investment. It was just remarkable. And here's the thing, here's why I love her example. Because if her focus had been her image or ego, there would be no Madam C.J. Walker. Because at every single turn, there was someone saying no. At every single turn, there was someone literally telling her to her face that she was not good enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not capable enough, and just a woman. Even other women. So I want you to consider that what other people do and don't have to say about your intention or your purpose clearly does not need to be what is driving your decisions to pursue that intention or purpose, right? And she is just such a beautiful example of it. I can go farther into it, but her background is was just incredible and filled with hardship. She was an orphan from the time she was 7, abused by her caretakers, extreme poverty. She had this scalp condition that had her nearly lose all of her hair. Just real hardship, and then became this mogul and was credited with being one of the first women millionaires in the United States. And while that was up for contention, she was definitely the first African-American woman millionaire in the United States. So it's just, it is really an inspiring story, because there was no room for image and ego in her purpose. And for all of you, I want you to consider what room image and ego has in your purpose. And then finally, as you guessed it, that top level is probably where all of us want to be. To be clear, I know this says decision driver journey, and I want to underscore that it's a journey. Because when we're up to big things, we're going to fall into and out of, we're going to have setbacks that are going to knock us back a couple of spots. And that's okay, right? It comes down to being able to get back up to making decisions from a place of your conviction to your purpose, and or to those ideals, or to that intention, or to that contribution you want to be and make. Your ability to progress on those big goals, on your career, your life, your contribution is going to be dependent on how quickly you can get from any of those lower levels back up to being driven by your mission, by your conviction to purpose, and having your focus be outside of yourself. So at this career CEO or chief strategist level, there is this experience of clarity. There is an experience of self-confidence, because you know that even if your PowerPoint stops working halfway through, a presentation with 5,000 people, or with your key investor or next big client, you're okay, right? You know what you're there to do, and then you get yourself through that. Is it ideal? Of course it isn't. But if the only way that we think we can survive or perform is when conditions are ideal, we are setting ourselves up for real disillusionment, and we are selling ourselves short. I don't want to get too far into biases for this conversation, but I wanted to bring this one up. And this is really just to exemplify that the way that others behave towards us has less to do with us than it has to do with them, right? So there is a very common bias, right? And I like to refer to it as the familiarity bias, but it really is an exposure bias. The exposure bias just simply tells us that we prefer and feel more comfortable and safe and confident around things and people and circumstances that we've had more exposure to. That's all. That's all it tells us. But the reason that this is so important is because, when you look at this picture, this may be the same office space, only that one is our interpretation based on familiarity or past exposure, and the other one is that sort of fear that might surface or resonate because we feel unfamiliar. The familiar and the unfamiliar. It really does impact where our brains go. Again, just solely out of being comfortable or uncomfortable. And so, again, I mention that because someone's response to us, it may have more to do with this bias, again, which is just very common and very natural, and that it also impacts our ability to feel comfortable in an area that's unfamiliar or a space that's unfamiliar. And I say this not to take the onus off, right? Just to be super clear, this is not to take the onus off of organizations and communities and teams to do what they know they need to do to be inclusive and make sure that everyone feels that they belong, but rather to bring back control to you to recognize that whether or not they are inclusive has less to do with you and more to do with them. And we'll touch on that again in a moment. But what it does do is that it impacts your decision making. And again, that is so important and it's so critical because it's at this place, it's at this time when you feel that discomfort or feel out of your element or your team feels at a loss that you want to be able to show up and lead with confidence. And so I want you to consider what your decisions would look like. What's informing your thoughts when you're in a circumstance like this, where you're feeling unwelcome and off to a side, versus what's informing when you actually feel a part of the team, when you feel like you're a part of what's happening. Now, again, we all want to be in this second clip. We all want to be that it's all for one and one for all, but that's not always going to be the case. And so are we willing to be with the discomfort and still make the decisions for ourselves that serve us and our community and that purpose from here, right? Are we still willing to make a decision from that conviction to purpose and that mission or that ultimate outcome that we're trying to create? So, we spent a lot of time there. I'm going to go very quickly through what's left because I wanted to leave a few minutes at the end. I do want to touch briefly, again, the impact of low self-confidence and why we fail at self-confidence. One of the reasons we fail at self-confidence is because we try to look the part, right? And so if you have ever done things like, done the superhero pose, you might call it the Superman, or tried to do things, what do they say that you kind of go like this and you steeple your hands and it makes you look and feel more confident. Okay, the problem with that is that more often than not only does it not actually help you feel more confident or be more confident, but it has a way of heightening your lack of confidence, because all of a sudden you're thinking, well, I did all the things, I memorized the interview questions. I carried out the perfect one-on-one. So this is the only screen that you guys missed. This is where I was referring to why we fail at self-confidence. And the reason is that we try to take these external actions to address an internal struggle. This is also what drives us to doing things like amassing credentials and awards. It's not that there's anything wrong. On the contrary, I'm very driven by accomplishment, and I love when people are accomplishment driven. But where we know that things have gone sideways is when that lack of validation has us forgetting how capable we are. It's when we feel that the only way that we're going to fit in is if we get that credential. The only way that we're going to be seen as being either truly worthy or truly capable is if we do X, Y, and Z. See, when you go out there to look for a way to solve what's in here and that gap in your self-confidence, what you're doing, I liken it to, like, let's say you just parked your car and you dropped your keys in the garage. It's like dropping the keys in the garage, but then going to look for them out in the driveway because the lighting is better. You're not going to find what you're looking for there. You guys with me? You need to go take, the fight and take the search where then to the right place, right? You need to go look for those keys in the garage because that's where you drop them. You need to be looking for your self-confidence inside, not by taking additional action. And again, the bottom line with self-confidence is being willing to be with the discomfort of disappointment, being willing to be with the discomfort of embarrassment, being willing to be with the discomfort of failure or rejection or not getting things right, or the discomfort of someone else's pettiness. Being willing to be with all of those things gave us Madam C.J. Walker, gave us the first self-made, Black woman millionaire in the United States. So it's being willing to take that struggle to the right place will make all of the difference. And now I mentioned here intangibles and tangibles, and I'll briefly touch on these. Intangibles are what I refer to as the inner work. So they're what you're actually thinking. They're the intentions behind your actions, like the actual intentions, not the ones that you say you have. The tangibles are the to-dos, right? Those are the leading practices, the how-tos. And what people get confused is, for example, someone will come to me as a leadership coaching client and they'll tell me about a problem. They'll say, but I'm already doing all of these things. But the problem is that they haven't addressed what's actually going on inside. Like, well, I'm spending extra time with this employee, so I don't know why they're not asking me for help. And yet, the entire time that they're spending with that employee, they're kind of doing this internal eye roll and thinking, this is horrible. When are they going to get it? I can't believe that I'm spending more time with you. And so can you imagine how having that playing in the back of your head, even if you did all the right things, is going to give you a very different result? So the mistake people make is putting the tangibles before the intangibles. And you cannot do that. That intention, that inner work, it does actually need to be addressed and it needs to be aligned. And so this, I'm going to go through very quickly just because I want to introduce you to this vital leadership framework. Now, everything starts with values. And you guys probably know that, you hear this at any sort of leadership conversation that you get into. And the values are just what's important to you and what really drives your decisions, especially when things get complicated. But when your values aren't handled, what you're going to find is that you're not making progress on the things that you say are important to you. So you're going to say you have this set of priorities, but when I look at your schedule, it's going to be apparent that you have another set of priorities. Then going on to the intangibles, I just touched on those, but those are your actual thoughts and intentions, right? That is what's actually going on in your head, and that energy that kind of goes along with it. When it's not aligned with what you're doing, we tend to put off a sort of vibe like a used car salesperson, right? If you guys understand that vibe, where you'll step on the lot and the person acts as though they are your best friend ever and just can't wait to help any way that they can. But it doesn't land that way. You never mistake them for being your best friend and necessarily looking out for you, right? Because that energy is off. And that's what happens when the intangibles, when what you're thinking and the intention going on and all the thoughts in the back of your head don't match the actions that you're taking. That's when we engage with people and we think, well, gosh, they're doing all the right things, they're saying all the right things, but something still doesn't quite jive. And that's why, because they're focusing on doing it right, but it's not quite coming from the place they'd have you think it's coming from. But the tangibles are important, because when you don't handle those, you'll find that there are a lot of false starts. You won't know when to go from learning to actually doing. And there's a lot of blaming and defensiveness here, simply coming from a lack of knowledge. Now, when we get to advanced competencies, and again, this is a progression, when you get to advanced competencies, this is really where you start to focus on other people and how you're able to align them and organize them to work towards that common purpose that I was talking about, towards that common goal. Now, when this isn't handled, when we're not adept or expert in this area, then our team simply won't understand their role is and why certain things are so much more important than certain other things. And you'll also feel like you have a really hard time getting buy-in. So that often lives here in the advanced competencies. And then at the very end, and this is where my approach differs from what's done in a lot of other leadership programs or by other leadership coaches. Then we get to leadership style. And the reason that we wait till the end to really distinguish your leadership style is because at this level, at that point, the inner work is done. And there's this level of authenticity with which you can be really honest with yourself about what you are and are not willing to develop in yourself and in others. And I say that because everyone, right, we all want to say that I am a nurturing leader. There is no dumb question, come to me, I will mentor you. But a lot of times what we want is someone who is a solution finder and a strategist and who doesn't need to come to us. And so our ability to assess people when we're hiring them is going to be impacted, as well as our ability to really elevate others and to inspire others. Because again, the reality is that we are not in a position and we don't have the intention of being willing to answer those 100 questions or work with somebody who's entry level or mentor somebody who doesn't have certain skills we think they should have had at the beginning, right? So that is why leadership style comes at the end. And when it's not handled, there is a lot of frustration and people banging their heads against the wall, wondering why they keep making the wrong choices. And this isn't limited, right? This isn't limited to a professional setting. If you think about it, this is also where we go when we, for example, in relationships, we're not clear on our boundaries, what we are and are not willing to develop and tolerate and manage in our relationship with others. And so as a result, we keep choosing the wrong person. Right? All of us probably have a friend who's incredibly capable and brilliant and keeps choosing the wrong partner. And it kind of comes from this same place. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and let's see. So what I want to do to kind of wrap it up, because we're already at time, is simply to say that we often take the discomfort to mean that we're going the wrong way. We take the lack of comfort to mean, oh, it's my gut telling me to stop and to turn around. And what I want you to understand is that is just your brain being human, right? As long as you're alive and you're breathing and you're up to big things, self-doubt is going to be a part of the equation. Self-doubt is always on the menu. You just don't need to always order it, right? You don't always, it can be on the menu and that's all right, but you don't always need to engage with it or entertain it. But more importantly, you don't need to let it be what's driving your decisions, right? When self-doubt is allowed to drive the bus, you don't go anywhere good. You simply don't go anywhere good. And we think it is our gut telling us not to do it. That is inaccurate. And the reason you know is because when your gut is telling you not to do something, it often has to do with integrity, right? When it's self-doubt telling you not to do something, it has to do with your ego. So I want you to, distinguish those two, because when it comes to leading, especially when you're the first or only, don't stop yourself from walking into that room because of self-doubt, right? Self-doubt can be there, and your intention and purpose to serve, your intention and purpose to move forward, your intention and purpose to elevate others is really what you want to have in that driver's seat of that bus. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because we can go on for another hour. But I am willing to stay to answer questions, you guys. I know I to get right up to the end of our time, but I love being in this conversation, and I'd love to hear any questions that you have, and feel free to unmute yourselves.
Asia, thank you so much. Before we get to question and answer, I just wanted to do a quick announcement because I know we are at 2 minutes before 6:00 p.m. So I want to respect everybody's time. Would love for all of you to stay for a few extra minutes to answer questions, but ask questions. But right before we do that, I just want to quickly share that tomorrow we will be hosting Dr. LaShonda Johnson. She will be speaking same time, same place, right here on Zoom. Tomorrow, February 16th at 5:00 p.m. Pacific, 8:00 Eastern. And for those of you in India, I don't know what time it is there. I will find out. But we will be starting at the same time with Dr. LaShonda Johnson. She will be talking about Black Women Leaders Matter, Keys to Success for Black Women Leaders in Higher Education. And then we have another speaker, quite a little bit of a last minute thing, but we'd love for all of you to come on Friday, if you can, Friday, February 18, this week, at 12:00 p.m. Pacific, 3:00 Eastern. We will be hosting Dr. Herbert Marbury. The link to sign up for his event is on our link tree. I will put that link tree in the chat, and would love for all of you to attend. Again, Friday, February 18, 12:00 p.m. Pacific, 3:00 Eastern, Black History from the Biblical Perspective. Dr. Herbert Marbury from Vanderbilt University will be joining us to discuss this. And so with that said, Asia, let's go ahead and take a few questions here. I know that there's some coming in on the chat. Oh, it's 6:30 in the morning for you guys in India. Wow. Thank you so much for being up super early to listen in on us today on our talk. Love that. I love that. So feel free to open up the chat. I know it is about to be 6:00 here, but I would love to have at least some 5 minutes for question and answer. So if for those of you that want to stay on, go ahead and let's do that.
And feel free to unmute. You don't have to use the chat if you'd rather just unmute and ask your question or share your comment or perspective.
Hi, may I ask my question and share?
Hi, Usman. Yes.
Hi, how's it going?
It's
Thank
going
you for
well.
I really appreciate everything you shared, and thank you for hosting, Dr. Asia. I know you brought up many aspects to like self-confidence, and you brought up a lot of different topics talking about the career, sort of different realms of career, and understanding like different aspects in terms of leadership. And I'm curious if I understood this correctly. I know you brought up, first of all, I want to highlight to be willing to be with what is, it reminds me of equanimity, which is the idea of like sort of mindfulness. I really appreciate that. And I know you brought up aspects about self-confidence and how there's a sort of a distinction between real self-confidence and sort of confidence itself. And I think that's really valuable what you brought up. And I'd be curious to hear more about sort of the distinction between like real self-confidence and confidence itself. I know you referenced that in the beginning as well.
Sure. So I think here's the thing, we all want to have, again, confidence, the confidence that comes from having been there and done that, having expertise, having background, having familiarity, having comfort, of course. But when we are getting started, when we're in an unfamiliar or new environment, what we need pulling for us is self-confidence. That's when it's so important that's why I keep saying to have your own back. I don't know if that translates the same way, but again, being willing to be generous and forgiving with yourself when things don't go according to plan, right? Because our biggest, often the biggest barrier to moving forward is what we are afraid we're going to feel if we fail, right? So I want you to think about that. It's not the actual failure, but what we are afraid we're going to feel if we fail. And this is so important because when we decide to give into that fear or that reluctance to be with that feeling or that disappointment, or again, that embarrassment, we've by default decided to fail in advance. So I want you to think about that. When you decide not to step into that place of discomfort for fear of what you might feel, you've already made the decision to fail in advance. So I want you to think about failure this way. If you're going to try something and you're going to fail, that means you're going to learn something in the process. When you fail because you didn't try, you learned absolutely nothing. And in fact, your world gets a little bit smaller. Because remember what I said about making decisions from fear? It actually tends to drive more fear. You know, this works in that space. So I don't know if that answered what you were looking for, but you know, feel free to chime in if you'd like something else on that.
Definitely gives more perspective. It reminds me of the perceived outcomes or the perception of outcomes. And I think what you reference is like the internal sort of negative dialogue that we often have in our heads. It causes anxiety and makes us feel like a fear of failure or fearing that we won't do well. So I think that's really important. And as a follow-up, how do you think, I know you talked about being the first in like different settings, whether it be different identities or honoring, you know, people from different backgrounds. How do you think sort of microaggressions impact, you know, people when they come into different spaces, being the only one or the first one? How is there like a research or perspective on how you see people navigating that and how they what sort of impact it has on people?
Well, I guess those are two different things. So I'll answer it this way. Yes, microaggressions, of course, impact us because we're human beings, right? We aim for connection and acceptance and inclusion and belonging and community. We want all of those things. And microaggressions, by definition, are a barrier to that, right? So that's one side of it. The other side is, again, where you get to choose. As an individual, as a leader, as someone who is up to a purpose or something bigger, you get to choose how someone else's microaggressions inform your decisions and how you move forward. So that is actually where the power lives, right? As I was referring to Madam C.J. Walker, she, you know, managed microaggressions, macroaggressions, every sort of aggression, and even violence, right? She could choose how that violence, how that aggression, how that microaggression was going to inform her next steps, her decisions, and her deliberate pursuit of that purpose. So we get to choose. Microaggressions, bad. Choice, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I do see a couple of questions in the chat. One is by Branshu Kumar. As it is said, self-esteem and self-confidence is critical for successful leadership. What do you think about it and why?
Yes. Yes to both. They are critical. And the reason is that leadership, by kind of almost by definition, is moving towards something that does not, I don't know if I want to say doesn't already exist, but it's kind of moving a group towards an unknown, right? Without that, there is no leadership. There's really no need for leadership if you're just doing the same thing, right? Over and over and over again. You just do some monitoring and some course correction. But leadership is what's necessary when you're actually moving forward into this new space, or stretching beyond what's known or that comfort zone or whatever the case is. So yes, both of those are necessary. But so when I referred to having your own back, that was my reference to kind of self-esteem and self-confidence, right? So although they're not the same, they're not quite the same thing, what I would want you to walk away with is that the amount of affection and generosity and gentleness and flexibility that you're willing to have with yourself is what's going to inform your self-esteem, right? Because you can make a failure a death sentence for your self-esteem, or you can make a failure just something that doesn't work, and now what do I do next? Right? There's a big difference. Same failure, exact same failure. But one mindset took us to making the failure a pronouncement that we're a failure, right? That we somehow don't deserve to try again. That of course we screwed it up. Because remember when you messed up that report in second grade, like we go to all these places and pull all of those hurts from the past. And we make that failure about us instead of what I'm proposing, that you make the failure about, so now what do I need to do to continue to move towards my purpose? Like I saw that this didn't work, so what do I want to try next? And that didn't work, so what do I want to try next, right? It's never about you. Where self-esteem becomes an issue is where you make that failure about you, where you making the wrong decision for yourself or your team about you, as opposed to simply recognizing that the best leaders are not going to get it right, but they're willing to try again.
So I see that Yamile has her hand up, and I see Aparna has a question in the chat. So I don't know who went first, but let's go ahead and go really quick. If you can answer Aparna's question really quick. If someone is being first in the crowd, how can one be more self-confident? And then we'll go right into Yamile.
Yeah. Now I think in terms of just, tactical, one, quick thing we can do, because there is confidence and comfort in numbers. Any crowd you get into, there's a very good chance that there's also someone else sitting over there on the other side of the room who's also by themselves, who also feels out of sorts, either for the same reason or a different reason. And there's a good opportunity to make a connection there. What you want to do, though, is not get caught in making the decision from the fact that I am the only one here. And so that means I'm unwelcome. And so that means I'm going to stand in the corner. You get what I mean? You can be the only one there, and you can even feel unwelcome, and you can choose to go engage, right? Because sometimes when we stop ourselves, it's because we think we're not going to get the response that we want. But when you're willing to be with this discomfort of, disappointment, or, well, that was kind of rude or something like that, right? And you don't make it about you, then it's okay. Someone can be kind of rude and you go on to the next person, and that's all right. Where we have a problem with self-confidence, especially in crowds like in coming into a crowd or where you're the first and only is when you think that someone's rudeness really is about you, right? But we know that someone else's behavior is more about them than it'll ever be about us.
Okay,
And then,
great.
Yama?
Yamile, go for it.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for this session, and happy to hear that you're a graduate of the Grazio Dio Business School. I'm serving right now as the Director of Admission there, so happy to hear that you're a graduate. This was really informative in the sense that I hadn't really thought about how being the one and only has impacted my decision making. So something for me to think about. I've gotten so used to having armor on for my college days and undergrad days that I really didn't realize that there might have been holes there that might have influenced my decision making. So thank you for that. My question is in regards to how to build support networks within our organization for those of us that are one and onlys, and how to navigate that space and sort of be a support network for one another.
Oh, yes. So, I am definitely not the expert at, creating, employee resource groups or support networks, but what I will tell you is this. Okay, so there are a couple things. If you're in an environment, this is not exactly what you asked, but I hope you don't mind that I answer it this way. If you're in an environment where, let's say, you feel unwelcome or where you feel it's not inclusive, you do not need to stay and be the change maker, right? And I feel like it's my responsibility to say that, because I think that oftentimes we think it's our responsibility. What I want people to take away is that you have the choice of who you want to be based on how that organization or how that change you want to make fits in your strategic plan for yourself. Because here's the thing, we know we fit into an organization's strategic plan, right? And that's why we're employed, because we're part of what's important to that organization. What we often forget is that that organization is also a part of our strategic plan. And so I want you to be really deliberate about what your strategic plan is for your career and for your experience in that organization. From that place, then you can decide, what's next and whether you want to, whether and how you want to start to create kind of networks of people and, community and things like that. So I wanted to distinguish that because I think it's important. Sometimes we are almost by default put into this position of being community builder, and that may or may not be what's on our strategic plan for ourselves or our lives or our careers or that company.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I don't know if I answered all the question you wanted. Feel free to ask a follow-up question. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to quickly say, so I know we have one more question coming in the chat, and then after this, it is 6:15, and I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So let's go ahead and answer this final question. And then for all of you that want to get in touch with Asia, she is on LinkedIn. I'll go ahead and provide that information in the chat so you can connect with her there. But we're going to take one more question, and then after that, we're going to go ahead and end the session for today. So Pranshu, he asks, being the first, is it affecting your leadership effectiveness and career satisfaction according to you? And according to you, what should we do to make this different?
Okay. And I know we were cut a little bit, or I was cut a little short because I was long-winded, but okay. Really what we want to do in this space is know from where you're making decisions, right? So remember I shared that triangle, that decision driver journey. Actually, it was an upside down triangle, so it looked like this. But I shared that decision driver journey. A leader is going to make decisions, right? Effective decisions from that conviction to purpose and that clarity of the goal that they're trying to move towards, right? So that even when the pandemic hits, for example, the CEO of a medical center knows that she needs to make decisions to be able to continue to care for patients and to care for staff, right? She is driven by that. So she's going to make a different set of decisions when she's driven by that versus when she's driven by, let's say, we might get fined if I make the wrong decision. And those may both be, it may be a very valid perspective from where to come, but as you can imagine, the type of decision that will come from thinking, how do I best serve the people we're here to serve, is going to be very different than the decision that comes from, how do I not get in trouble? So I hope that helps and briefly address part of that question. Please do connect with me. I'd love to connect with every single one of you on LinkedIn. If you do send me an invite, let me know, just say something, from Pepperdine, or saw you through Pepperdine. And I would love to connect with every single one of you. And just thank you so much for having me here. This has been just really wonderful. Thank you for bearing with going over time. And I love talking about this, and I love that you guys are so engaging.
Yes, thank you so much, Asia, for being here today. I would love for all of you to please fill out the form as well. I put the link in the chat. You can click on that. That gives us feedback and lets us know how well we're doing in presenting and providing these types of events for all of you. And it was so great to have you on today, Asia. I'm so excited that you were here today.
I was excited to be here today. You guys are awesome. I cannot, wait to be more involved with Pepperdine, especially, once we're back in real life. And I don't know, maybe even you might even see me on around campus, skulking the halls as I'm pursuing a PhD. So we'll see.
Ooh, we got to talk. All right, everybody, let's, okay, so thank you all so much. We will all see you again at our next event happening again tomorrow evening here at Pacific time, 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. And till then, thank you all so much for being here today for our Black History Month speaker series. We will see you all later on, and have a great morning, evening, or night wherever you are.